In today's video, we're going to talk about what I think is one of the secret ingredients to getting a more beautiful, durable, glossy, and even solvent-resistant shellac French polish finish, and that is oil. Now, all oils aren't created equally. Some oils can aid in the application of the French polish. Other oils can stay as part of the finish permanently and increase the gloss and durability. In this video, I'm going to show you the types of oils I use, explain how they work, and explain how they can help you produce a more glossy and beautiful French polish shellac finish. My name is Tom Bills, and welcome to the Art of Lutherie. Let's talk about oils, because that's pretty straightforward. Okay, so the most common thing you're going to see is olive oil. This is a fancy organic one because this is the kind that we just had in our kitchen, and that's usually what I use, is whatever we have in our kitchen. It doesn't have to be organic. I always used extra virgin. I don't know why. I don't think I ever tried anything other than that, but that's what I was originally learned using, and so I just kind of stuck with it. But so I always use an extra virgin, either organic or not. I can't see any difference between the two. So let me just, while we're on this, I'll just stick with this. Okay, so you've got there's two types of oil. There's a drying oil, there's a non-drying oil. So let me just explain what they are first. And this is in the handbook as well, but the non-drying oil, such as olive oil, it never polymerizes. So when you put it into the finish, it's going to help you with the application and lubrication of the pad while you're applying it, but it's going to eventually find its way out. So after a day of polishing with olive oil, when you come back to do the next session, you're going to see a lot of that olive oil has migrated and come up to the surface. You're going to want to wipe that off with a paper towel before you start your next section. And it'll continue to do that until the majority of that is gone from the finish. So it's not going to really incorporate into the finished film that we're creating. Now, an oil like this, walnut oil, is a drying oil. The drying oil is going to polymerize. It is going to be a permanent part of the finished film. And it's really important to understand the difference in the two. These are the only two oils that I recommend. People have asked me about they've tried other stuff, and I've actually helped people fix guitars where they used other types of oils, and it just totally made a gooey mess out of their French polish, and it was really difficult to fix. So stick with these, you're going to be good. The one concern so we talked about the type of olive oil. So for the walnut oil, I love the Spectrum brand. There's two reasons why I like Spectrum. Okay, so this is a drying oil. So if you take this oil and this isn't opened yet, and this is sitting on a shelf in a store somewhere, and there's air. If there were air in here, it would begin the polymerization process, actually. So one thing that Spectrum does, or at least they used to do, I don't know, things seem all changing in these days, but one of the reasons I started using this in the first place is they were nitrogen sealed. And so when you open this and smell this, you won't smell. There's a smell when oil polymerizes. You might know it if you've ever smelled like boiled linseed oil or things like that. I started out my degree's in jazz guitar and audio technology from college, but I started out as a major in oil painting, and so I never forget the smell of the oil painting studio, of the oils polymerizing, dry. We call it drying or whatever, but if you smell that, then you know that this is getting kind of old, but they pack it with that nitrogen so that it stays fresh. So that's one thing I love about the Spectrum brand. It stays fresh. Number two, they don't add vitamin E. So you got to be careful, because some people will add stuff to it to try to keep it fresh, and that vitamin E is not what you want. That messes up your finish. So you just want plain walnut oil. Okay, and it doesn't have to be this brand, but this is just the one so you know why I'm using this particular brand. But just make sure that, if possible, it's packed the right way, so it's not going to be halfway polymerized by the time you get it. And second of all, try to get it with no additives if you can. It's pretty important. Okay, so two different oils. I use both kinds. This is something very weird about my technique and my approach, is I use both kinds of oil. And most people will use one or the other. My teacher only used this. Most everyone else I've ever seen only uses this. So why do I use both, and why is it important? Okay, well, let me just tell you what I struggled with and what made me have this realization. So I began just using walnut oil, but I was learning at the time, and I wasn't doing a good enough job with my pressure of my technique, and so I wasn't sort of squeezing out all the excess oil and removing it. And what was happening is that when I would get done polishing, there was still enough oil. This oil will migrate a little before it begins the polymerization process, especially if you have a lot of it. And sometimes when you're struggling with learning how to do French polishing, you end up using a lot of oil, which I was doing. And because of that, the oil that gets left on the surface is this real thin film of oil exposed to the air overnight. I come back in the morning, and that's beginning to polymerize, and you get something called layering, where later when you go to do your final buffing or rub out or whatever, you can begin to see what looks like different layers of finish coming through in different places, and it's not what you want. So to prevent that, what I realized, aside from fixing my technique, which we're going to talk about technique in our next section here, is I realized that by using a little bit of the walnut oil in the actual shellac, like I actually pour just a little drop right into the shellac, I don't know the exact amount, just a little, like a tiny little globule the size of like, can you see that little part in my finger there? I don't know. Anyway, just a little bit into the actual bottle, and then I shake it up before each session so that it kind of disperses into it. But I stopped using this for the lubrication of the pad, which we're going to talk about in the next section. So a lot of times you'll see a French polisher, he'll put some oil on the bottom of the pad and then begin putting it on. That's the lubrication. So for that part, I just use the olive oil. And so what happened is, what I stumbled on that really has helped me and been able to help a lot of people figuring this out, is that the reason you add the drying oil is because this acts like a glossing agent. It also acts like it gives it a little more flexibility, so it adds it gives the finish more of an ability to move with the way the wood expands and contracts over time from exposure to different humidity levels, different temperature levels, and stuff like that. And so you need something to give it that little tiny bit of flexibility, and then it acts to give it a better gloss. It also, after it's fully polymerized, gives it a little more solvent resistance in case somebody drips a little bit of alcohol. If they wipe it off fast enough, it's not going to eat into it as much as it would on a finish without the walnut oil. I haven't experimented with that personally, but that's the way I was taught about it. But I do find that the finish is much more stable, and that's one of the reasons why, I mentioned at the very beginning, if you were here, about my website, tbguitars.com, where you go look at those finishes and they look so shiny, it almost looks like a nitro finish or something, and they stay that way. And the reason they're able to stay that way is partly because there's some walnut oil that's incorporated into that film, which helps it keep that gloss over time, so it doesn't end up getting dull like a lot of French polishes do over time. But the beautiful discovery that I made was that when I used the olive oil for the lubrication, it acted like a covering over any of the drying oil that would kind of find its way to the surface between coats. There was a layer on top already of olive oil. We're talking micro thin here. I'm not just slopping oil all over this thing. But I found that it prevented the polymerization between coats of the drying oil so that there's no more layering. And it just kind of fixed that problem and makes everything really much easier. And it's a lot easier when you're learning. And then once you get the technique down, it's a breeze, and it's great, and it gets great results. So that's the story behind the oils of the guitar, or of the finish process. So I hope you found that video helpful, enjoyable, and if you didn't yet, you should download the free shellac handbook. The links are below. It has all that information plus a lot more. It's just a quick, easy way to reference all the stuff from this video, the previous videos in this series, and the ones that are to come. And also, speaking of those future videos, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified when the next one comes out. That's all for today's video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.